Welcome to the View from the Inside podcast. Once again, I'm Kevin Richardson. This is episode number 8. So excited for the guest that we have for this episode, Jeanine Mouchawar. She is a certified professional life and parenting coach, has a lot of things that she's getting involved in. And the thing that really interested me the most was kind of hearing about Jeanine's story and how she's kind of come up with this thing that she focuses on, which is parent teen relationships. So that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. And before we get into that whole piece, I got to say, Jeanine, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Excited to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kevin. It's fun to reconnect with you.
Yeah, well, and we always like to do the origin story when we have a guest on the podcast. And you've got a great story. You and I ran across each other at Stanford and then reconnected via LinkedIn, social media, a bunch of common friends that we have. But let's jump in and talk about your story pre-Stanford, because I always find it really interesting. Stanford's a super hard place to get into. And, where'd you grow up and how did that lead you to Stanford?
Oh, okay. Oh, cool. I've never been asked that. I love it. I grew up in Southern California in the LA area. And I guess I just, was one of those nerdy high school students that loved to learn and was super, super driven. And, my mom would find me in my bedroom saying, "It's time for dinner." And I'd be like, "No, I just got to finish this extra credit problem for calculus. Leave me alone." And, that just ended up where in my school, we had just gotten a college counselor, and she's like, "No one's ever gone to Stanford before. I think you have a chance to do that." And so I applied to a few different schools, and yeah, I got in, and so grateful that, that made that connection. And obviously, as you and I know, it's a little easier to get in back then.
Yes.
But what a great, phenomenal experience, right? I mean, college was amazing and so fun.
Yeah, well, I'm still bitter that I didn't get recruited by UCLA to play football, but that's a whole other podcast if people have been listening to, I think, episode 1. But so you get to Stanford. There's a lot of stuff going on at Stanford, a lot of things to get involved in. What did you major in? What kind of activities were you involved in? And how did that process treat you?
Oh gosh, so many fun things to do at
Yeah.
Stanford, right? I started off just kind of taking general classes and then realized I really, really enjoyed art history classes. To which my parents said, "We're not paying for Stanford if you major in art history." And so I decided, I went down and looked at what major has the least number of units that I was decent at, and it ended up being quantitative economics.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
Just
so I majored in that so I could take a ton of art history classes. So like junior year, I studied abroad in Florence, so I could study all the art history there. That was a phenomenal experience. And I guess, a couple of other highlights at Stanford, I grew up dancing and loved to dance. So I ended up trying out to be a Stanford Dolly, the 5 women who dance with the Stanford band at athletic events. And I made that. And that was super cool. I don't remember if you were on the team at that time, but the football team traveled to Japan for the Coca-Cola Bowl.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. No, I made the trip to Tokyo. Yeah, that was quite the experience. And then I always tell this story to all my football friends. If you remember correctly, on that trip, University of Arizona is who we played. They flew to San Francisco, and we got on the same plane with that team to go to Japan. Right?
Oh,
So
I didn't know that because we
yeah,
flew over early to do like promotional stuff, but
right.
that's so cool. You had like your rivalry on the airplane.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would work today, but yeah, it's worked back then. That's what we did. Yeah. So yeah, and I always struggled to explain the dolly thing, but you did a good job there. So it's the dance team for the band because people will say, "Well, those are your cheerleaders," and I'll be like, "No, there's cheerleaders also at Stanford. We have some strange things and traditions around athletics that way."
That's so true, right? The cheerleaders came on, I think, after I graduated. Traditionally, it was 5 women who danced with the band.
Right,
So
right.
we didn't have to say anything.
Well, and of course, you left out the most important part. You were part of the freshman dorm Branner, which for the non-Stanford listeners, I'll just point out that's just a cut above. My wife Teresa, she was in Branner, and anybody who was in Branner will explain to you how good Branner is relative to all the other dorms. So, right? I mean, that's
It
it.
was an all freshman dorm, so the connection and the community was like nothing I could have ever imagined, and still lifelong friends from there.
Yeah, it is almost, I guess, yeah, fraternal and sorority-ish, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is a pretty tight group. Although, over at Donner, we did have that street party that was pretty epic on a yearly basis, but that's for another podcast. So you finish up at Stanford, and where does your work life take you at that point? And then how do you land on being a life and parenting coach?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess in my 20s, I ended up, oh gosh, starting in consulting and then going to work for an advertising company. And then most of the time in my 20s, I ended up doing marketing for gaming companies.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
that ended up taking me into like working for 20th Century Fox and Virgin. They ended up like marketing games that Electronic Arts was creating at the time when they were just starting out. And it was super fun just being sort of in the underneath a large entertainment company, but focused on really the new gaming and online industry. So super exciting. And then around 30, I got married. My husband's a Stanford grad as well. We met at his brother's wedding in Memorial Church, which was
Okay.
so fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had kids, and we decided that it was important to one of us, or it was important to us that one of us stay home with the kids. So that became me.
Okay.
And so, yeah, through the next couple decades, I did a lot of volunteer work that was connected to my children. And then, yeah, I guess what ended up taking me into being a life coach is, obviously most of my time was spent on parenting and raising kids, and that all went pretty smoothly, like normal hiccups, normal
Right.
challenges in
Yeah.
the beginning. And then when we got to the high school years, I just felt like, I am a smart, educated woman who knows how to solve problems. And it felt like I wasn't being as effective of a parent as I wanted to be. Like, so for example, my daughter was this, overachieving straight A student, but she'd come home and she'd be stressed and she'd have anxiety and she'd feel overwhelmed and lots of pressure. And it just seemed like, although we had a good connection and good conversation, like I wasn't really helping her overcome that.
Right.
My middle child, he was diagnosed with ADD and a learning disability at a young age. And we got to the high school years, and academics became super challenging for him. He got really unmotivated. His grades were dropping. Ended up connecting with, a group of friends that were kind of doing high risk things like smoking pot. And I just felt like the tools that I had, the resources I had as a parent was not working parenting him. And his behavior was getting more scary to me. And I just noticed we were disconnecting more and more.
Right.
And then my youngest went through COVID. So the whole challenges of parenting a child through COVID was not prepared for. And I just remember he was so into like video gaming. I remember thinking, he's so lazy and unproductive. How can I motivate him?
Right.
And so all that to say, it just felt like I wasn't equipped with the tools that I wanted to be the kind of parent I wanted to be. And I felt like I was losing that really close connection with my kids. And I remember thinking, I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. What's going on. So I ended up joining, basically going back to school and getting educated in dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, conscious parenting. And I learned all these new communication tools to communicate with my kids that just were so much more effective and really helped us reconnect, and just where I felt like, okay, my parenting is working now, and I felt like a good parent and the parent I wanted to be.
So basically, you've got this life experience that throws you headlong into what has now become, because you can kind of feel it when you talk about this. I've jumped on a couple of podcasts to get ready for this podcast. I mean, it's really a passion. You're saying, "Hey, this is something I went through. I didn't have my best foot forward at the beginning, but by the end, I had it figured out, and let me pass on this info." Couple of things I gotta throw in here. I know as a parent who's raised a couple of boys and the teen years and everything that's going on, and how hard do you push, and what do you expect out of kids? I got to take you back and ask a couple of questions. You've got a brother, Mitch Gaylord, gold medalist in the Olympics. And then we kind of go past your husband, who is an anesthesiologist. And oh, by the way, was on the Olympic team in water polo. I believe they got a silver in '88, right? He played at Stanford. And by the way, he's in my favorite Hall of Fame. He's in the Stanford Hall of Fame for water polo. But talk a little bit about those guys and what you learned about how to get out there and compete and push, and how hard do you push, and how do you recover, because there's got to be some great lessons from being associated with two guys that quite frankly achieved at probably the highest level they could in their sports, in gymnastics and water polo.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, when the Olympics happened this last summer, I was writing a lot of posts and blogs about what I've learned from my brother Mitch and what I've learned from my husband Alan, and how that has applied to parenting in my
Right.
world. Yeah, I think there were a couple big themes that popped out. One was that well, first of all, they both didn't start their sports until my brother was, I think, 12 and Alan was in high school.
Oh,
So it's a
wow.
very
Okay.
different environment than it is now,
Yeah.
right? Our kids, if they want to make it to the Olympics, most of us think they need to start at a very young age, have private coaches, doing their sport year round. And so I think one of the things that was really important that I walked away from as a parenting message is that it's really important for your kids to play lots of sports and not just one thing.
Right.
And I think the thing that I noticed with both my husband and my brother is they were really, really passionate and driven in their sport, regardless of either set of parents.
Okay.
And so it was really a lot of self-driven without, oh, I wouldn't say, yeah, I'd say, yeah, without parental pressure about playing the sport.
Okay.
And so it became important to Alan and me to kind of raise the kids with that same philosophy. Try lots of different things. And if you find a sport that you're really passionate about, and it's coming from you, then we're happy to support that and back that. But that you really need to have that internal drive and love for the sport. Like both my husband and my brother would say, it never felt like work.
Right. Yeah.
It was just fun.
Right.
And so we were sort of keeping an eye on that with our children. And then I think the other thing that both my husband and my brother experienced in different ways was some high expectation and pressure from their dads. And it became really important to my husband and myself not to do that to our children.
Right.
So consequently, I don't have kids that went to the Olympics
Right.
or
Right.
played sports in college. And, but that was just the choice we made. And none of them seemed super driven in a particular sport. And we didn't really push that. But, I like to say when I'm coaching parents, it's like, there is no one right way,
Right.
right? You got to just figure out what works for your family. And I share that because my youngest, ended up being, I think he's almost 6'4". He is
Right.
built like a water player. He's super athletic, and he's so mad that we didn't push him more for water polo and make him stay in it. But at the time, it was a huge battle between us. And my husband and I just didn't want that. And we just thought he really didn't want to do it at the time. He didn't seem to enjoy it. And so we didn't push it. But I say that just to share, like, there is no one right path. You got to do what just feels right to you and for your relationship with your kids.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Well, so let's transition to this coaching that you're doing. So to be really straightforward on it, you're working on parent teen relationships, and you work specifically with the parent, not the teen. And you've got kind of 5 steps, if you will, that you really focus on with the parent. Maybe you could give us a high level on that and how it works.
Yeah, sure. Well, if we want to back up a second, I think it's really important to understand if you are a parent where you feel like I'm not my teenager's go to person, I don't have the connection I want, is just to take a minute and pull back and understand why that's happening. So, again, this is zoomed out, doesn't apply to everyone, but I think
Right.
for most of us, what's going on is we're using this outdated approach to parenting where our conversations and communication tend to be focused on things that we're worried about or scared about. And we want our kid to stop doing that or change what they're doing or fix what they're doing, right? Whether their grades aren't where we want them to be, or if they're being disrespectful or they're lying or being sneaky, right? Our conversations tend to be focused around stopping, changing, or fixing what they're doing. And when kids become teenagers, when we're communicating that way, it tends to shut the conversation down and they tend to feel like we don't really understand what's going on inside of them. And so that's why we hear things like, you don't get it, you don't understand.
Right.
I don't haven't
Yeah.
met a single parent who hasn't heard that.
Yeah.
And then when our kids don't do what we want them to do, when we tell them you should do this or you need to do this, or we give our advice all from a really beautiful intention, right? Heart loving place, wanting them to be the best version of themselves. When they don't listen, we tend to tighten the reins and create more rules and more restrictions because we're worried and we're
Right.
scared.
Right.
And for many of us, we use the model we were parented with, which is rules and punishments and punitive consequences to control them
Right.
and steer them in the way we want to steer them. And I think for a lot of us, when that doesn't work, we're just left completely exhausted. And so I love to just share that, like, if that's true for you, which I find is true for all my clients, that kind of, if you zoom out, that general pattern is going on. Really, and again, we talked about earlier, I love solutions. It's
Right.
fixable, and
Yeah.
we just need new approaches and new strategies so we can be their go-to person and have that connection we want. And so
Well,
to answer your, oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, and I that approach makes so much sense because as a parent, you're always trying to give this advice that is well intentioned and oh gosh, I've been through that. Or in your case, you can say, well, gosh, look at what my brother did to go to the Olympics, or look at what dad did, and all these different things. But unless it's presented in a way that can be absorbed by the teen, then it's really worthless advice. So you've got to get it to land. I always think of the best coaches I had. Those were the guys that could really get you to listen. That old thing, oh, you'd run through a brick wall for so and so. The reality was, I think about my best coach ever. He was a high school basketball coach, and his whole thing was, give me a whole lot of Kevin, right? I know you're not a basketball player. I know that you're going to rebound hard. Eric Revenell loves that too, by the way. You're going to rebound hard. You're going to play tough in the paint. And if you get 12 rebounds, that means you're going to get me 8 points. And he didn't try to turn me into a basketball player. And thus, I just love the guy. And I think that's the same thing with kids, right? You got to get them. It's almost a judo move. You have to kind of throw them by you and use that energy they have, right?
Yeah, that's such a great metaphor. I mean, I guess I would love to ask you, like, what did you love about that coach? Like, what resonated for you with that coach?
Oh god, that one's easy, right? It was just, "Hey, give me what you have," right? We're not gonna worry about trying to fix stuff that you don't do well. Do what you do well. And it was just so much fun because you would play with reckless abandon versus always looking over your shoulder. Hey, did I make the right play? You just go do your thing. I always brag on my wife, Teresa. She's one of my favorite athletes because, and I make the joke, and it's a joke because she knows how far the 10-foot line is behind the net in volleyball. But she would always say, who cares? It's painted on the floor, just jump from behind it and get the kill, right? Stay focused on what you're doing. And yeah, that was always the key. And I know growing up with a dad who gave advice, who was a college or high school basketball coach, um, some of the best advice he gave me was the advice where it was playing into the strengths that you had as an athlete and as a student and all those different things. So really interesting that not only does that apply to sports, but just on how to get that communication going with a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, everything you just hit on, I think really can dramatically change our connection with our teenagers. What I hear you saying is, if you want to apply this to parenting, is you had a coach who just really brought out like authentic Kevin, right?
Right.
This is me. These are
Whatever
my
that is, by the
strengths.
way. Yeah. Authentic.
Yeah, but the same thing can apply to our kids, right? We all have our strengths and gifts. And what I hear is like he really encouraged you to, tap into that while keeping some guardrails on, right?
Yeah.
So you kept moving in the direction that he wanted you to head in. And that's such a great metaphor for parenting. I like to say, let's move forward with some firm boundaries or guardrails, right? And this heavy dose of compassion and connection to our kids. And I think that we tend to lose that a lot of the time when we're so focused on getting an outcome or achieving a result.
Right. Right.
And so when I work with parents, I try to, like, again, like if we zoom out, if you can focus on slowing yourself down and connecting with them before you jump to the conversation about stopping, fixing, or changing their behavior or trying to motivate them to do something
Right.
different,
Right.
right? It's just like so much, you'll have so much more success if you slow yourself down and connect. And by connect, it was some of the things you just mentioned, right? Like really focusing on having a conversation and not a lecture,
Right.
really, slowing ourselves down and getting them talking and being curious about what's going on inside of them. What are they thinking? How
Right.
are they feeling?
Right.
Because, cognitive behavioral therapy tells us it's what we're thinking and the stories and what we're saying to ourselves in our mind creates a feeling inside of us. And that is what results in our behavior or our action.
Right.
And so when we're trying to solve for their behavior or what they're doing that's scaring us or worrying us, we're not really getting at the root cause of the problem, which is, hey, what's going on inside of my kid and what's coming up with those feelings, and then having the conversation around that.
Right. Right.
So, like, for example, if your kid's grades are plummeting, we want to know, okay, well, what's behind that? What's going on? Are they in
Right.
class and did they ask a question and their friends made fun of them? So they're humiliated,
Right.
right? Are they not understanding a concept? So they don't feel, they're feeling like they're not smart enough and they just need some resources or direction or guidance on how to get the information. If they're smoking pot, like, is that because they're feeling pressure because they want to fit in with a group of kids? If they don't want to go to school, is it because they were teased and they're feeling embarrassed or humiliated? Right? To really try to have conversations with them. And that's what I help my clients with, to get at the root cause of the behavior that might be worrying you or scaring you or pissing you off that you don't like. Um, and then when you uncover that, back to our sports analogy, is that, you want to look at the problem as the problem's on one side of the football bench.
Right.
And on the total other side of the football bench is you and your teenager together, right? Where they don't feel so alone in their feeling not good enough or embarrassed or humiliated, whatever's going on for them. And the problem, which is the lying, disrespect, whatever the flavor is of the day, that's on the other side of the bench.
Right.
And you guys are a team trying to solve for that together.
Right. Right. And there's what I hear you talking a lot about too. There's a lot of vulnerability in that, right? Like you have to give this teen the ability to feel vulnerable. Hey, I failed at this, or I need help on this, right? Because we always kind of present as, oh, we've got it all figured out. And they need to know, oh no, I don't have it all figured out. I've got a few more years on you. And the that gives you the ability to fail and come back from that failure, if you will. Talk a little bit about with my daily job, certified financial planner. That means that we get involved in estate planning, insurance planning, tax planning, financial planning, and investments for people. Now, people come to us for investments, and lo and behold, we lay these other four things on them, and we have a client for life. But the reality is, when we're doing estate planning, I'm not an attorney. You and I have plenty of friends from college that are attorneys. Um, but that doesn't really matter in our daily business because we know enough about estate planning to know when, hey, you need to go see one of our friends that's an attorney because you need a living trust, something real specific like that. At the same time, if you need advice on how to set up the beneficiaries on your IRA, which is a big deal, it's either right or it's wrong. There's no in between. We're more than qualified with the training that we have. It seems like with the life coach and the parenting coach, that's that space that you sit in where, hey, if it's a situation that you run into where, hey, this is some real deep therapy, sounds like you probably hand off to a therapist at that point. But at the same time, I think of your service when I first ran across it on the internet probably 3 or 4 months ago. I was like, wow, that's a great idea, because a lot of times you don't need the full therapy. You need somebody that's been through this and has studied it a little bit just to give you a little bit of advice, right? Is that kind of the world you live in too? It seems like it's very similar to what we do on a daily basis with investments and individuals.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's just such a great analogy. um, like you were saying, if you don't have the knowledge about, you know, the legal documents or the IRA or whatever it is, you go seek somebody who has that knowledge. And
Right.
it's just interesting because there tends to be no stigma on that. Like, we don't expect ourselves to be an expert on law
Mutual funds. Yeah.
or
Or
right, mutual
estate
funds
planning.
or
Yeah.
investing in stocks. And
Right.
so we don't hesitate to seek someone out like you. But there definitely is more of this stigma on seeking out help with parenting, which, I mean, I felt that. So I know it's there and I get it. But what I find so fascinating is we were never educated or taught how to parent, especially teenagers. So
Right.
why do we expect ourselves to think like not only should we know how to parent, but we should be the perfect parent and the
Right.
really good parent and not have
Right.
any issues? It's
Yeah.
kind of absurd when you think about it. And when I went and started learning all this stuff, I thought, wow, this information and these communication tools and skills and how to teach our kids these life skills is way more important than the calculus class that I
Right.
took.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think, and to your point, this does kind of sit in the middle of therapy and doing nothing. Is
Right.
this parenting coach where if you're like me, you're like, okay, well, I don't have like a clinical depression issue, nor does my
Right.
kids, but I need some basic communication tools to communicate with my kids to really effectively motivate them to do what I know is like helping them be the best version of themselves. And that is, to your point, like right where parent coaching sits in.
Well, and then delivery. To me, this is the exciting part about what you do and what I do. COVID, that was a speed bump for everybody. Man, we could do hours of podcasts around that. But the one thing that it opened up for my industry, and I'm assuming your industry, I'll let you speak to it, is the ability to. We have a client in Germany. Like, that's just crazy to me. When I went to work at Merrill Lynch 23 years ago, they would tell you if you don't see your clients in person 4 times a year, they'll be somebody else's client by the end of the year. And now, literally, via Zoom, we have clients all over the world, which is a crazy thing. Speak to that a little bit if somebody's thinking about engaging somebody like yourself or you. How does that engagement work? Because I'm assuming the Zoom call is pretty darn effective. In person's always great, but boy, the Zoom call seems like a real efficient way to handle a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I don't meet with anyone in person. Even
Oh,
like
wow.
my local clients prefer Zoom because it's
Miss the
really
traffic.
convenient.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, I mean, this world of social media that we live in and this global connection, I've got, parents who are Polish who live in Switzerland that I coach. I've got a single mom who lives in France who's from Australia that I coach, and then obviously all over the United States. So, yeah, Zoom, you and I are in different cities right now. It's like all of a sudden it's such a beautiful tool to really give us access to a lot more resources than we've ever had. And to really find somebody you vibe with and connect with, like you for financial planning and me for parent coaching.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. I always tell clients that or prospects, like, this shouldn't feel like punishment, right? It should be a fit. We should get along. You should feel like we bring value. There's lots of advisors, there's lots of coaches, but yeah, it should be a fit for sure. Well, so give me this. How do people get a hold of you if they want to reach out? I know that your website, I got on there, I've looked at it for a couple of weeks here. I got a list of 50 things to do with a teenager. I wish I had one in the house because I've got a list of 50 things to do. But how do they get a hold of you? You've got a great website if anybody is kicking the tires for this kind of service.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the best place to start is my website at JanineMouchawar.com. And like you said, on there, there's so many free resources. One is, yeah, 50 activities to connect to your teen. And really, that applies to preteens and young adults as well. You can grab a lot of ideas off there. I think even when like you and I are kids are young adults, we still want to connect with them.
Right.
So I really coach, probably parents with kids from 12 to 24. But there's that. There is a link to podcasts like this. So I'll link up our podcast on there and other ones they've been on. There are some free classes on there. The one that is the most popular is how to be your teenager's go-to person. So you can
Okay.
go on there and get a 45-minute class where I do a deep dive into what we talked about today. And then just to have some, if you're looking for just weekly parenting tips and strategies, the best thing to do is hop on my email list. And, those will come right to your inbox twice a week. Yeah, giving you some tips and strategies. I'm also on, all the social media platforms. We found each other on LinkedIn and
Right.
on Instagram. I'm at Jeanine.theparentingcoach. And I also have a private, I'm not private. I guess it doesn't cost anything. You can join my Facebook group called Parenting Teens, How to Not Lose Your Shit. So
I
most of
could,
us want to learn how to do that.
yeah, I could probably use some, yeah, master's work on that. That's for sure. Well, gosh, this was super fun. I love what you're doing. It was fun to watch from afar via social media. Fun to really kind of get into the detail and spend some time and learn a little more about what you're doing. And it kind of proves that whole thing. These people that I was lucky enough to go to Stanford with, they end up on a path, and it always ends up being pretty darn productive. I mean, you're working on video games in the 90s, and now all of a sudden you're doing great work with parents and teens. So gosh, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me today, Kevin. It was so fun reconnecting with you.
Well, thanks for tuning in. Remember, the best thing you can do for us, give us a follow or a share of this podcast. If you've got a financial question, by all means, give us a call, 831-717-1144. All of the info on Jeanine and what she does will be in our show notes. And you can also shoot us an email, krichardson@tacwealth.com. On behalf of Jeanine and our producer, Bill Tucker, and the good people at Proudmouth, thanks for tuning in, and so long until next time.
Thank you for listening to the View from the Inside podcast with Kevin Richardson. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, head over to www.tacwealth.com. And don't forget to check the show notes for additional contact information. Kevin Richardson is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards Center for Financial Planning Incorporated owns and licenses the certification marks CFP, Certified Financial Planner, and CFP with plaque design in the United States to Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards Incorporated, which authorizes individuals who successfully complete the organization's initial and ongoing certification requirements to use the certification marks.